Hello. It's been a little while. Um, I'm not entirely sure where to start, but any confidence that I may or may not have developed through the last few videos has evaporated since then. Um, Firstly, I had some issues with. I just wasn't happy with the quality of the videos I'd produced, and then, due to some technical issues and stupidity, I ended up losing a lot of those anyway. So it's been a little while, and I don't even know if I'm going to actually end up publishing this. But at the end of the day, it's good practice. I've had a lot of good practice from previous videos, even the ones that I didn't end up recording voiceover for. And if I continue, eventually I might be happy with something. So if you're seeing this, I have decided to publish the video. And if not, I'm just talking to myself. But anyway, on with the Scrawlrbox. As you can see, I've started to open it. And I decided while I was recording this to sit outside for a little bit, because it was a really nice day, and I was feeling slightly disheartened having just lost months and months worth of footage. But I thought this was a good opportunity to start again. And you'll probably be noticing we're currently in September, and this was, I think, July's Scrawlrbox, so it's still been a little while. It's taken a little while to get around to it through the summer and things like that. But I really enjoyed this one, and some of the videos I recorded earlier did produce good art at the end of them, but I wasn't happy with the production quality. But this one, I've decided to give it a go. I have just been messing around with the artwork, the featured artwork, and the paper and things up until this point. But this is where we sort of get into the meat of the box, if you will. And the first thing I pulled out of this box was a paint pen. And in what seems to be the story of my life, by coincidence, I'd just bought a rather large bundle of Posca pens. So I inevitably continued the trend of comparing what I've just got into the box to a different brand or a similar pen or some such other thing like that. And after that green pen, I then pulled out a gold pen, a black pen, a white pen, and a shiny silver pen, which was a little bit different. And since these were obviously paint pens, I decided to add those to the key inside the book. Of course, because it was a nice day and the birds were singing and it was a joy to be outside, it was the perfect day for some people around the corner to do some construction work. And thus, my plans for a nice outdoor video were scuppered. Now, this silver paint pen was a little different to the other ones. It was a different brand, and as I later find out, it has a few little unique twists of its own. And that is this month's sticker, which seems to be the green and gold pens from the box. I also pulled out this Milan pencil, which I believe is an HB. Or it might have been an H, I can't quite remember now. And I pulled out a little Milan square rubber as well, which I can only describe it as looking strangely edible. I had a strange urge to bite into it the whole time, which was luckily helped somewhat by the fact that I also got a mint toffee. And now if we just have a quick look at the menu, just to make sure all of the ingredients are inside, and look at this month's prompt, which was Paper Tiger. Now, one of the reasons that I was so eager to retry videos with this box is because I immediately had an idea for this prompt when I saw the pens and the prompt itself. And one thing with these paint pens is that you spend an awful lot of time shaking and depressing in order to get them to work. So I will spare you that. If you wanted to see that, I imagine you'd probably be buying the pens yourself. But they're very similar to Posca pens in that regard, in that you have to give them a really good shake and a few really good presses before you get any kind of colour out of them. Now, of course, just after I'd finished filming the introduction to this video, the sun went in. It was a bit of a recurring trend that the outdoors was determined to ruin my video that day. But nevertheless, I returned inside and got on with the sketch. Now, my idea for this prompt was largely inspired by origami, which is something that I've had an interest in for a very long time, and also to an extent by other geometric looking animals that I'd seen before and various other things rendered in a sort of low poly style. And obviously, because the prompt was paper tiger, my thought was an origami tiger. And I did have a few ideas for how to sort of draw that sideways, but because of the shapes of the face, I eventually ended up going with a face-on approach. And I will have to admit, I did need a few references for when I was trying to plan out what the sketch would look like. You can see here, I'm just briefly swatching the different pens to see how they work and how they work with each other and how they interact with the pencil, those types of things. And you might be able to see here in the corner that silver pen in particular, it sort of has a more reflective quality to it when it's wet, and then as it dries quite matte. Now, the thing with this pen is that if you use it on a porous surface, it will absorb into the paper, and that usually removes much of the reflective texture. But if you use it on something less porous, like a painted wood or possibly glass or plastic, you will find that it's much more metallic looking and almost a mirror finish. As you can see here, I had a clothing tag from some item of clothing, not sponsored by George. It was just what I had at hand, and I tested the metallic pen on that because I thought with that being a slightly more shiny and pre-treated piece of paper, it might give you a better idea of how the pen was supposed to look. You can see that I'm looking up a couple of references and things like that for the sketch, and I didn't particularly draw what was in the reference. It's not that I was just drawing from that image, it was that I literally couldn't remember what a tiger looked like. I'm not in the habit of looking at tigers particularly, so I did just need to look at a few images to refresh my memory on what I was actually drawing and see where the stripes go, that kind of thing. So it's not that I was drawing a particular photo, I literally just went on Google Images and searched for tiger and swiped through a few to get a better idea of where the stripes went and which colours I could put where. And if you look, I started experimenting with different ways to use the colours on the face. At first I couldn't decide if I wanted to follow the colour scheme that was used in the sticker and use the green for the dark stripes and the gold for the light stripes and then just use the black for lining. And you can see that I'm experimenting with that approach on this sketch. But eventually I did decide to stick with sort of more traditional colours and use the gold and the black and white for stripes, and just use the green for some of the highlights. And I'm not sure if you can actually see from this angle, but I did experiment with side-on views and things like that for the sketch, but I couldn't really make them work, and I do actually want to come back to that because I do still have some ideas for how those images could look, and I think they could be really good, but as it stood without the experience I had with the supplies, I wasn't sure if I could implement that well enough. I think it would have needed to be a larger piece than the size of the paper would allow, so I now have some bigger canvases and I do intend to revisit that. So once I had a pretty good idea of where I was putting the different colours and the shapes I was going to go with, I started to sketch out the image itself. And I didn't pre-plan it excessively. I just drew the vague sort of shape of a tiger and used some fairly sharp angles to define those shapes, and then filled in the actual low poly details afterwards. I wasn't quite happy with the way that the sketch was going at first, so I decided to just erase it and start again. And then that happened. Now, I did try to rescue it as best I could. I tried to flatten out the paper a little, but it wasn't really working for me, and I decided that I would have to just try a different piece of paper. I obviously wanted to stick with the supplies that came in the box and fulfill the challenge as best I could, but under the circumstances the paper wasn't really usable, and the other piece you could see the swatch through the other side. But what I did do is I looked at the type of paper that was included in the box, and I remembered that I actually had received a very similar, I can't remember now if it was the same brand or if it was the actual same paper as well, but in a slightly different thickness, in a Scrawlrbox a few months prior. So having dug that out and checked that it was very similar paper, I used that instead, and I feel like I'm sure the differences between the two papers are probably trivial, but I did want to be as true to the challenge as I possibly could. Having sketched out roughly where I wanted the different features of the piece to go, I then started essentially just filling in the space with triangles, sectioning off different parts of the drawing around those predefined features in order to give it the best geometric effect that I could, whilst also not messing with those parts of the drawing. Once I'd filled in as many triangles as I could, I started to fill those in with the pens. Now, within the drawing, I essentially substituted the silver pen where white would be, the gold pen where the orange would be, and then used the black as the black. And the green pen was mostly used for features like the eyes and the nose. And then the white pen, I mostly just used that to touch up the lines and things. I could have used a very thin masking tape, but that wasn't part of the challenge in this case. And similarly, I could have used something like masking fluid, but I didn't really feel that it was necessary because I had pre-drawn the lines as straight as I could get them, and obviously it was possible to define those a little more using the white pen afterwards. If I was going to do this again on a canvas, for example, I would probably look into a thin tape to use for the divisions. I can't imagine it would be as easy as you might think, because obviously the tape would have to be cut quite precisely in some cases for some of the smaller lines, but it would certainly result in a more crisp look at the end. Now, when I originally did this, when I originally started to draw these eyes, I did the outside in black and the eyes themselves in silver before moving on to the nose, but when I came back to it, I wasn't happy with the way that looked, and you'll see a little later on that does change. I went on to outline a few of the other features, such as the ears and the mouth with the black pen, before starting to fill in some of the other sections. Now, I did decide to outline most of these first before I went in to colour them fully, because it meant that if I changed my mind about any of the colours or which pieces should be which colour, it would be far easier to go over one line than it would to colour over an entire section. And at this point you can see I'm filling in the stripes with the green, because I looked at the swatches I did again and decided that actually I preferred these in the green, and this is something I changed my mind on throughout the entire piece. I think if I was to do it again, I might try it with the alternate colours to what I ended up with, just to see how that looked. Because obviously the point of this challenge is to use all of the supplies within the box, and only the supplies within the box, to create a piece. But if I was doing something on my own time, I wouldn't have those same limitations. You can see when I'm doing this, the lines aren't particularly straight and the drawing certainly isn't symmetrical, and I was worried about this from the start. I was worried that it would look messy, but I think the end result actually does look really good, and I don't know if it would be better to have the straighter lines and a more symmetrical look, but I think it actually almost adds to the style of the piece that it isn't completely symmetrical. It did take a while to fill in these black sections because the black and white pens were slightly smaller nibbed than the green and gold ones. So the sections generally that I drew with these were smaller, and that is one of the reasons why I decided against the black stripes in the end, because it took quite a while to fill those in. I then just used the pens to touch up any sections on the drawing that I felt needed touching up. Some of them looked a little streaky, for example, and some of them just weren't quite as shiny as I thought they could be. So I went over and gave a few of those colours another coat. And once I was done with that, I used the white pen pretty much for the first time to go over a lot of those outsides of the lines and tidy them up a little bit. Obviously, as I mentioned before, the resulting piece here isn't as shiny as I had hoped when I originally started to draw it, because the matte texture of the paper meant that the metallic pen didn't really get a chance to give off the mirror effect, and I'm not sure if that would change if it was done on a canvas. It might be that the canvas wasn't as absorbent as the paper and you got a more reflective look, or it might be that the texture of the canvas actually counteracted that entirely. Even so, I was pretty happy with how shiny it was and the effect that the image gave. And that was the finished piece. I was very happy with the way it came out, and I'm not sure that the shininess actually is captured very well on camera. I did try my best to show you, but I'm really pleased with the way it came out, and honestly it's probably one of my favourite pieces that I've ever done at all, never mind just in a Scrawlrbox. So I'm certainly wanting to try some more like this in the future. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time.